So way back in the 1930s, there was this absolutely brutal and honestly often forgotten war that tore through South America. We're going to dive into just one battle from that conflict, the Chaco War. But man, what a battle. It became a true legend. This is the story of the First Battle of Nanawa, a name that was literally forged in blood, mud, and just unbelievable resilience.
Right away, this battle got a nickname that tells you everything you need to know: the South American Verdun. And look, that wasn't just some exaggeration for effect. No way. It was a horrifying echo of World War I's most infamous meat grinder. We're talking relentless, attritional warfare. But this wasn't happening in the fields of France. This was in the sweltering, totally unforgiving wilderness of the Chaco.
And that really brings us to the core question here, the mystery we're going to unravel. You've got a Paraguayan garrison at Nanawa, just 2,500 soldiers, okay? And they are staring down a Bolivian army of 9,000, nearly 4 times their size. So the question is, how on earth did this tiny force not only survive, but actually pull off a decisive victory? It seems impossible, right? Well, let's break it.
Right, the South American Verdun. This battle really boiled down to 3 things: blood, mud, and just grinding attrition. This wasn't a fight about brilliant sweeping maneuvers. Nope. It was all about raw endurance in conditions you probably can't even imagine. Victory here wasn't glorious. It was measured in inches gained and lives lost in those suffocating trenches.
So you gotta mark this date, January 20th, 1933. That's the day it all kicked off. On that morning, the first shots were fired, and it was like lighting a fuse on a week-long inferno. And you have to understand, this wasn't just some other skirmish in a war nobody remembers. This was the beginning of a battle that would literally forge a nation's identity in fire.
Okay, so to really get what happened at Nanawa, we gotta zoom out a bit. We need to talk about the Chaco War. I mean, what was it? And why in the world were 2 countries fighting so viciously over this huge, dry, and, frankly, punishing piece of land? So from 1932 to 35, Bolivia and Paraguay were just tearing each other apart over this region called the Gran Chaco. For Bolivia, this was like an existential fight. See, they were landlocked, they'd lost their coastline in an earlier war, and they were desperate for a way to get to the Atlantic Ocean. Their one and only hope? The Paraguay River, which runs right through the middle of the very land they were fighting for.
Yeah, this whole war didn't just explode out of nowhere. It was more of a slow burn, you know? Tensions had been simmering for years. Then, in June of 32, Bolivia captured a Paraguayan outpost, and boom, that lit the fuse. But Paraguay, they didn't just roll over. They hit back, hard. Their victory at Fort Boquerón that September was this incredibly grueling siege, and it became this huge national rallying cry. So now the stage was set for a massive showdown. By January 1933, Bolivia was ready to go all in, launching a huge offensive to crush what they saw as the most critical Paraguayan stronghold, Nanawa. Which brings us right back to the main character of this story, the fortress itself. Because Nanawa, well, it wasn't just a bunch of trenches dug in the dirt. No, this was an ingeniously designed killing ground, a true fortress, built right in the middle of that unforgiving Chaco forest.
I mean, the design of this place tells a fascinating story all on its own. The Paraguayans actually had help from 2 white Russian officers. These guys were veterans of World War I's Eastern Front. They brought all that hard-earned, brutal knowledge with them to the Chaco and created an absolute masterpiece of defensive engineering. We're talking zigzagging trenches that made artillery almost useless, huge fields of barbed wire that were designed to funnel attackers right into kill zones, and machine gun nests placed so perfectly their fields of fire overlapped. Nanawa wasn't just a fort, it was the toughest nut to crack in the entire war, period.
And here's where it gets this weirdly international flavor. Leading the Bolivian attack was a German general, Hans Kumpt. He was a World War I veteran, and his whole thing was just massive, overwhelming frontal assaults. While his entire doctrine was about to slam headfirst into this Russian-designed fortress, defended by the Paraguayan colonel Luis Irazabal. So you see, this was more than just a battle. It was a clash of European military ideas playing out in the South American jungle.
And here is that David versus Goliath story laid out in stark, simple numbers. You've got 9,000 Bolivian attackers, and on the other side, just 2,500 Paraguayan defenders. I mean, on paper, this should have been over in a day. A quick, decisive Bolivian win. But, as we're about to find out, the story of Nanawa was written by something other than arithmetic.
All right, let's get into the battle itself. How did they hold that unbreakable line? For 1 week, from January 20th to the 26th, Nanawa became a literal crucible of fire, mud, and just pure, raw human will.
So on January 20th, General Conchis unleashes his army. The Bolivians throw literally everything they have at the fortress. And for a second, it looks like it's going to work. They actually breach the outer defenses. But the Paraguayans, they just refuse to break. They launch these savage counterattacks. And get this, when their ammo started running low, the fighting turned completely primal. Defenders were charging out of the trenches with their infamous machetes. And then, the sky just opened up. Torrential rains turned the whole battlefield into this sucking quagmire. The Bolivian tanks, their troops, they were just stuck. By January 26, it was over. The attack had failed completely. The Paraguayans had taken back every single inch of their fortress.
Now, the cost of this fight was just brutal, but it was brutally one-sided. Bolivia lost an estimated 2,000 soldiers, and the Paraguayan defenders, 248. Just think about that. That's a staggering 8-to-1 casualty ratio. If you want a final verdict on Kunt's whole frontal assault strategy versus the genius of Nanawa's defenses, well, there it is.
So the guns fell silent, but the impact of Nanawa, that was just getting started. This was so much more than a single victory on the map. This was a battle whose echo would resonate through the rest of the war, and deep into the very soul of a nation.
I mean, the ripple effects from Nanawa were just immense. For Paraguay, it was a gigantic morale boost. It was proof, real tangible proof, that they could beat a bigger, better-equipped army. Strategically, it was a massive turning point that absolutely shattered the reputation of the Bolivian commander, Hans Kunt. But the legacy goes way beyond the battlefield. It became this powerful symbol of national resilience. It even inspired one of Paraguay's most famous songs, a polka, written by a soldier who was actually wounded right there in the battle. How amazing is that?
When you boil it all down, the lesson of Nanawa is pretty universal, isn't it? It's proof that smart engineering, a solid defensive strategy, and just an unbreakable will to fight for your home, well, it can help you overcome what look like impossible odds. It was a total triumph of quality over quantity, of smarts over just brute force.
You know, a story like Nanawa shows us that a battle isn't just something that happened in the past. It can become a core memory, a story a whole country tells itself about who they are and what they're capable of enduring. And that kind of makes you wonder, right? What are the moments, the memories that are defining our nations, our world, right now? Something to think about.